violence. The Algerian, because these wars end up being, from the perspective of the colonial powers, a kind of existential struggle. In other words, the French to lose Algeria is the lose part of France. Algeria is not even a colony; it's become a department of France. Part of France needs to be kept. Horrible things went on. Sometimes other courses have shown a movie called The Battle of Algiers. Have you ever heard of this? It's a fabulous movie. This is actually a picture from the Battle of Algiers because we have very few pictures of what actually happened in Algeria because the French had such a tight control over pictures of what happened in this part of the world. The British, in the repression of the Mau Mau rebellion in Nigeria, in Kenya rather, did all sorts of things which are still being adjudicated in courts right now. They exacted collective punishments. They tried and executed people without proper trial. They did all the sorts of things you're not supposed to do according to the laws of war, which we talked about. So, in this context of the civilized versus the uncivilized, and especially in the context in which the civilized ungratefully want to overthrow the yoke of the civilized, the moderations of war we talked about were honored in the breach. But I want to point this out, it wasn't only in the context, maintaining power through violence is not a Western monopoly. And decolonization produces tremendous amounts of violence in the decolonized world. Now, the argument is, of course, that these differences in the decolonized world between peoples are in many ways themselves the product of the imperial enterprise. So Muslims and Hindus become separate in law because of the British impositions of different legal systems and different marriage codes and so forth for different religions. So all of this is all in a sort of complex circle of causation. I just want to tell you that in the making of these new nations, there's also these levels of violence and of violation of what comes to be human rights standards that we're living with absolutely in the world today in the civil wars of Africa, in these decolonized places where these group states that were made out of these artificial units in Africa in the 19th century are now coming apart, and people are fighting desperately, existentially, horribly, to maintain some of these. So one of the cases, the earliest of these cases, as you probably know, the partition of India, in which India and Pakistan split with the loss of millions of people. Not only did people were split, but books were split. So this is divvying up the Indian National Library. Some books go to Pakistan, some books go to India. So this is the violence on the level of knowledge, but there's violence on the level of people. And we still live with some of that. As may have been following the really pogroms against Muslims in Gujarat, in parts of India, parts of India now. So we're talking millions of people went back and forth, tens of millions, and probably millions died in this. So the violence of empire continues in the post-imperial context. And the same thing would be true in the war in Nigeria, in which there's a state wants to break off Biafra. This is the source of Physicians for Human Rights. We'll come back to this, but I just basically want to tell you that the southern part of Nigeria breaks off Biafra, and the Nigerian government creates a huge blockade around this, won't let food through, won't let the Red Cross in, and starves these folks to death. And this is the argument, this is where the Physicians for Human Rights, Physicians Without Borders, entered the picture and refused to remain silent. Many of these pictures we have through witnessing of human rights activism. Okay, so far, what I've tried to tell you then is the making of this imperial context in which the Congo fits in, right? And to say that we still live with the legacies of this, and that many of the human rights and humanitarian debates today are debates which grow out of these conflicts, be they the local debates about gender relations in much of the world, or the debates about the right of the obligation, responsibility to intervene in post-colonial struggles like Rwanda, or the Sudan, or Somalia or the Congo are a function of this story. So the things you read about in the paper now are functions. And I could actually, though I don't want to get into this, tell the story of the Palestinian Israeli story is a story of the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, British colonial interest in this part of the world. So we live with this, is what I'm trying to tell you. We live with this. Every time you pick up the paper, I bet you if you picked up the paper for a week and looked at articles, you'd find an article every day that follows from one of these stories. Okay, so that follows from one of these stories in all sorts of directions. Is that okay? You stretch a little bit. You've been very quiet. It's because everything I said was so clear? Oh, yeah. I know you guys, yes. Yes. Don't ask, yes. What? Teleological? Thank you. The word is defined teleological. T-E, and I was never good at spelling. T-E-L-O-G. Teleological. The root is telos. And so it's... Now you want to have it be readable too? Okay, telos, T-E-L-O-S. Yes? Teleological, T-E-L-I-O-L-O-G-I-C-A-L. I'll put it on EP. T-O. Oh, God. Can I just put this on B-Space? It's telos and teleological. You want to know what they mean? I'll tell you. Telos is the end, is that toward which something goes. From the Greek, right? And in Aristotelian philosophy, where this comes from, it's sort of an end that's inherent in the thing itself. And like the telos of all of us is to grow old and die. It's not an ultimate purpose. We know we're all set up to do that. It's intrinsic to us. So that's what the telos is. We have a direction. And what these 19th century philosophers of history, be it Karl Marx or Hegel or Mill or all these great philosophers of history, all said, look, history has a direction. It goes somewhere. It has an end. The end being the realization of liberty. What it could be, purpose is sort of, there's an inbuilt purpose. They also call sort of the idea which runs it, which they call the eidos, E-I-D-O-S. And we could talk about what gives something a telos is a slightly different question. The telos is just the end thing of it. But I don't think we need to get into the philosophical basis for why something has a telos. It's simply to say, by telos I mean a built-in end. Is that okay? We could talk about the philosophy of it, but let's leave that for coffee. Is that okay? Because it's an interesting question why something has the end it has.
I think that the purpose aspect of it is important because it's part of the Aristotelian sort of natural slave idea. That they don't just die like all men. Their purpose in that interim was that they're a slave.
Right.
So there's an idea that they're sort of failed men in the sense that the purpose of the master was to sort of vet his good life.
Right.
So, and I'm not trying to get too philosophical, but I also believe that same idea came into countries believing that not only did they have an ultimate end to their history, but they also had a purpose for which they're like a manifest path.
Right. Right. Well, there's two. It's an interesting question. Look, I think there are two issues at stake. One is, are people made for a purpose? And the racist version is that there's some version of the natural slave idea. So that's built in. It's synchronic. It's in one moment. That's what you're built in for. This national story is a slightly different version because we still live with much of this. The idea is, look, if you think you know which direction history is going, and you're a country or a person, the question is, do you move history along? So in the Russian Revolution or in the Chinese Revolution, they're absolutely explicitly saying, look, the point of this revolution is, yes, we know we're a peasant culture, and it turns out that only industrial cultures with working classes move the revolutions. But we can move history along, say the Chinese. We'll nudge it along. We'll push it forward. They were explicit on this notion. So Lenin sits around and says, we may not be ready for revolution, but now's the time to do it. We'll just force history forward. Or we could say, as the British did, is that Britain is intrinsically the, and